Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome back to AI News. My name is Ethan, and today we have a very special guest. She is the one that I report on my news channel all the time. Her name is Chloe Cole. Can you introduce yourself to our audience a little bit?
So I am a 19-year-old girl from the Central Valley of California, and I speak on behalf of my experience as a former patient of a gender clinic. I am a former trans-identified child, and I went through the process of going through a social and medical gender transition between the ages of 12 to 16. I started calling myself a boy, and I chose a new name for myself at the age of 12 because after years of dealing with issues with my body image, of going through the stress of an early puberty, of never really feeling like I fit in, especially with the other girls and women around me, as a girl who was kind of tomboyish, I discovered the transgender community online, and I felt like it gave me this explanation for why I felt like I was different, and for why I felt this way about myself and about my womanhood. And at 13 years old, I was fast-tracked by my doctors into the process of medically transitioning, starting with a medication called Lupron to suppress my puberty. And shortly after, I was put on my first shot of testosterone, of male hormones, to masculinize my body. And at 15 years old, I went through my first and my only surgery during this time. It was a double mastectomy, and my breasts were surgically removed. And it was less than a year later that I realized my regret around this entire process, that I really, in the end, was a very feminine woman, that I wanted to grow from a girl into a woman, that I wanted to have children and a family of my own and be a mother. And I made the very difficult decision to stop my transition, having lost a lot of friends along the way, having lost the support of my doctors even. And since I was 17 years old, I've been speaking out about what happened to me and for the rights of these children to grow up with their bodies fully intact and for the rights of their parents.
Wow. Because a lot of parents think that this is not real. When I report this story, a lot of parents are like, this is just a one case scenario. It doesn't happen like that. How did they convince you to do the transition? Because it's a very serious decision for a 13 years old to make. I heard your speech, and then you said, I couldn't even drive, and I get to do all these things to my body.
Yeah, I learned about this entirely through the internet. This is not a thing, as far as I know, that was in school curriculum yet. But I first heard about it when I was browsing through just social media, just communities around my own personal hobbies. So like video games that I played, cartoons, anime that I watched, musicians that I listened to. A lot of these users in these communities were also young men and women and boys and girls who identified with a part of the LGBT. Many of them called themselves gay or lesbian or bisexual, but there was one particular group amongst them that really stood out to me, and it was the transgender community. And it was just such a novel concept to me, because there were all these new words and phrases with which people were describing themselves, and the way they talked about self-expression and finding their own community and acceptance in a world where they were struggling. Many of them came from rough backgrounds, coming from homes where they were abused or neglected, or going to schools where they were bullied by their peers, and seemingly finding a light in the tunnel through transitioning. As a girl who felt very awkward growing up and didn't have very many friends and didn't really have much of a sense of identity, it was something that gave me a lot of hope.
Yeah, so you're sort of looking for acceptance within the...
And not even socially even. I was looking for acceptance of myself. I felt like there was something wrong with me for a long time. That there was something wrong with my body, that there was something wrong with me as a person. And I was scrambling to find an explanation for myself as to why I felt this way. And I thought that this was it.
And you were 13?
I was 12 going on 13, yes.
Wow. And did the school say anything to you, or the counselor say anything to you?
So in my experience, the schools that I went to were pretty uninvolved. I started transitioning socially and medically when I was still in middle school. I was in 8th grade. And I never really told most of my peers about it till the end of the year. And I didn't really tell any of my teachers or any school staff about it, which is very jarring for them, actually, because all of a sudden, after a few weeks, I started looking more and more like a boy every day. I started having a deeper voice, and I started looking more like my male peers after years of, visibly going through a female puberty, right? And a lot of the other students, I was already being bullied, and this was taken as an opportunity for them to just pick on me further, because all of a sudden, I stood out.
Yes.
I was going through something very strange. They weren't sure what was happening to me. But just for my presentation alone, even as I was starting to cut my hair shorter, they picked on me. Yeah. And the adults at my school, the teachers, they saw this happening and they just turned a blind eye to it. And I feel like that pushed me further into it, because it felt like I had nobody to defend for me. But at the same time, I thought that this was something that I couldn't control, that this was just my identity. And it was like, they're doing this to me over nothing. And I want to prove them wrong. I want to show them that one day I will be a boy. I'll look like a boy. I'll sound like a boy. And they'll accept me as one.
Wow. I bet that's a lot of... I remember when I was young, I feel the same way. I want to prove them wrong. But I didn't go through the whole thing. What did your parents thought about all this thing that you went through?
So I told them about it by writing a letter, because I was actually initially very scared of how they might react to it, because I knew that it was a big announcement for me to make to them, something very deeply personal that I knew would affect them emotionally too. And I felt like they deserved to know, and that we deserved to work through this together as a family. And upon reading it, they wanted to be supportive of me and help me emotionally through this time, because they could see that I was struggling. But they knew that it was just another part of my struggle as a girl who was unique and trying to find her role in the world. They were very sensible. They wanted to just allow me to experiment with the way I presented myself, maybe, the way I dressed and the way I cut my hair. But they didn't want me to be making any permanent decisions around my body, because they knew that I was still a child, that I had to grow up first, and I deserved to have time to just be a kid. And so they didn't feel equipped to really help me through this during this time, because it was something that was very new to them too. And so they sought the help of the professionals. They started sending me to a psychologist, because they thought that that would be of better help to me. Yes. They didn't expect that my psychologists and physicians would just go straight for it and to...
Wrong psychologist.
To push me further down this path. They never really ever pushed back. And they expected my mom and dad to only go along with it. They told them that this was the only choice I had, that this was a part of my identity, that children already understand what their gender identity is from a young age, which no child knows what their identity is. That it goes against everything that we know about children and their behavior and psychology. But they really nailed this idea really hard into my mom and dad's brain, that this is the only choice, that if I wasn't allowed to do this, they essentially gave them the ultimatum of having to choose between having a dead daughter or a living transgender son. And when you're a mother or a father and you're presented this choice by your child's doctor of basically life or death, what wouldn't you do for them?
Did they show any study or any statistic to support their idea?
Yeah, they cited the high suicide statistics within the transgender community to convince my parents that this is going to be grave for me. But I wasn't suicidal at all until I actually started on the process of medically transitioning, and I was on the drugs and I had been operated on. But they didn't tell my mom and dad this.
Do they have to get your parents' approval to do the surgery and the medication?
They did, but I think in the state of California, it only requires a sign-off of one parent. And my mom and dad were also manipulated emotionally and convinced that this is the only path for me.
That is a very scary thought, that they are the one that's pushing you. All these doctors and professionals, they're the one that's pushing all these ideas just down your throat, down to a 13 years old girl's throat, and
to thousands of children and families.
And this is a very serious topic right now. What made you want to stand out and speak on this issue? Because I couldn't imagine you have to relive all these things every single day and every time you go on stage. What makes you want to stand out?
There were a few things that led up to that. The process of going through the detransition was incredibly difficult for me, emotionally, physically, in every single way. I didn't know for the longest time what to call myself. I didn't know that there was even a word for what happened to me until it happened. And I didn't think I had anywhere to turn. I had lost all my support from the transgender community. I was now being pushed away and ostracized.
That's one of the questions that I want to ask. Like, after you decided you're gonna go back to being a girl, what did they do to you?
They shamed me, basically, for talking about my regret and my shame and the grief that I had from losing my breasts, from losing my body, from losing years of my childhood that I'll never get back. They told me that it was all my fault, that I should have known better, even though I was a child, that I should just stay quiet and shut up because my story wasn't important. And for a while, I did. But after I spent some time contemplating it, just thinking to myself, I realized just how wrong this treatment was, that I didn't deserve to feel this way just for telling my story. And I started to wonder how many people out there were like me. And so I started looking up. I looked up the word detransition, and I was surprised to find that there is an entire community online of thousands of other people going through exactly what I did. And I started connecting with these people, and I mean, it gave me hope that I could have a future after this, that I wasn't alone, that I mattered. And hearing these people's struggles, I mean, almost every single person who I was talking to during that time was an adult, and most of them had gone through the process of transitioning as adults. But I had this intuition that there had to be so many other children and teenagers out there just like me. But how could they find a voice? I felt like I had this responsibility to get myself together. Even as rough of a situation I was in, I felt like I had to start speaking up because I didn't know who else could. And it's not only that initial pain and loneliness of detransitioning that motivates me to keep speaking up, because I don't think anybody deserves to go through that. But it's also my own family that keeps me going every day. I think of my nieces and my nephews and some of my younger cousins and the world that they're growing up in today. They deserve so much better. They deserve to grow up in a world where what happened to me won't happen to them. Where they can be safe and innocent and enjoy their childhood.
Are you a religious person?
I am.
Oh,
I'm Christian.
You're a Christian. Did the church said anything? Did the church offer help during the time that you want to transition or the time that you did the transition?
So I actually was not religiously affiliated during the course of my transition or throughout most of my childhood, actually. My mother and father were Christian in my early years, and they brought me to church up until I was roughly about 4 or 5 years old, maybe. And after that, we just stopped going as a family. And I asked my parents recently why that was. And part of the reason that my dad gave me was that they didn't want to feel as though they were forcing any sort of worldview on me. They wanted me to be able to become independent and develop views and convictions of my own. But I feel like in a lot of ways that lack of faith made it so that throughout a lot of my childhood and my adolescence, I was struggling to find an identity, to find an understanding of the world around me, to have solid convictions and morals and a purpose. And I found that through transitioning. But once my transition was over, I had to find a new foundation. Yes. I had to find a real foundation. And it was through my journey with speaking out, speaking to all these communities and these legislatures across the US, that I connected with a lot of Christian individuals and organizations. And I came back to faith, and I realized that no matter what I did to myself, no matter who I said I was, God has only ever looked at me and loved me as his daughter.
Because right now, there's a lot of things happening in the church as well. And then the church want to help person with gender dysphoria and everything, but not a lot of churches know how to help. What would you say that is the best possible way? What should churches do, or what should Christians do to help person with gender dysphoria?
Yeah, many churches, I mean, every single community in the US right now is grappling with this issue.
Yes.
At least one family, at least one individual is being affected by this, whether we realize this or not. But our churches, many of them are afraid to activate on this because they don't want to alienate anybody, because they don't want to lose their support. But what's at risk is our own families and children. This is not something that we can just turn away from. We have to fight back.
Yes.
We have to speak the truth in love.
Okay.
And not back down.
How to love and fight back?
I mean, in speaking to these individuals, you have to speak to them in love without affirming the delusion that they are of the opposite sex or that they are somebody that they are not. And to help guide them to the understanding that God doesn't make mistakes, that the way that they were made is not wrong, that it's beautiful, that it is a gift, and to extend that hand of support to them as they're struggling, but also to be the rock, to hold them down in reality and in faith.
Thank you. Such word of wisdom from a young girl right here. Thank you for speaking up, and thank you for being the voice of the generation. And we gotta pray, and then we're gonna change California and change our country.
California and America are beautiful, and they're worth saving.
Yes.
So we have to fight back.
Time to make a stand. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.